BESA consultant is I'm also secretary of the BESA Indoor Air Quality Group, which is, I think, why I've been asked to chair today, because obviously today's subject is a huge one for indoor air quality. The new TR19 Air specification is a big priority for BESA this year, and we're delighted to have had it published. There's been a lot of work gone into it. It's taken a while to get there, but it's a very important piece of work. And we've been subtitling it Revolutionizing Air Quality in Buildings, because we genuinely believe it is a revolution. The awareness around indoor air quality, and particularly the need for maintenance and high quality ventilation in buildings, has never been higher. And in fact, it's been linked very closely with some very serious healthcare issues. In fact, some of you might have seen some of the articles we've been writing recently with healthcare experts, where it's been discussed that if we can get building ventilation right, improve air quality more broadly, can have a tremendous impact on some very serious health issues. In fact, in a number of areas, it's being claimed that better management and maintenance of ventilation can save more lives than doctors in some very important areas, particularly around respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular issues, and even around mental health. I mean, one example that was given to me by a healthcare expert the other day was, if you have an asthma sufferer, and there are many thousands, and there are growing numbers in the UK, going to their doctor for treatment, the doctor will treat them and alleviate the symptoms of that asthma, but they'll be sending them back into the same living and working environment indoors, where they'll be affected by the conditions, whether it's poorly ventilated, damp, whether there's mold. So therefore, they're not solving the problem. They're just addressing it, but not getting to the root causes of it. And that's something, I mean, that's a very important implication for our industry. And it kind of puts this work around TR19 Air into a broader context. So if we can get this right, if we can improve ventilation, and we do need to revolutionize, I believe, and I think our panelists will agree, to make a difference, to make a big difference, then it's going to be a very, very big topic in the next few years. And of course, since the COVID pandemic, it's been right at the top of the headlines. So I won't talk anymore about that. That's just giving you a bit of background, putting TR19 into a context. What I'd like to do now is introduce our panel. We are very lucky to have a panel of experts who have been heavily involved in this work and who have particular interest in this whole area around ventilation and management of ventilation systems in buildings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves one by one. You can see their names now there in front of you, and just give a brief point about their involvement around TR19 or around the issue of ventilation in buildings before we get into our wider discussion. So if I can invite our first panelist to join us, that's Gary Nicholls, Managing Director of Swiftclean. So Gary, are you there?
Oh, hello, Ewan. Thanks for introducing me. Yeah, my involvement, I started my business, Swiftclean, back in 1982, and I've been involved in as an expert on the expert panel in terms of writing the various guides to good practice from TR17 right through to the current version, TR19. Obviously, it's a big interest of my business because that's the service that we provide. So yes, that's been my involvement over the years, and it's really good to see it's now got to this this particular stage, an exciting moment in launching this this month.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And I mean, we'll come back to you in a couple of minutes to give a bit more about that background. It's a long history, and I know you've been involved for many years. I mean, we've known each other a long time, probably more years than I care to mention. So quickly moving on. And then, so George Friend, CEO of Ventilation Surveys and Services. George, good afternoon. So what's your involvement in this area?
Afternoon, Ewan, and everyone that's joining us. So I've been involved in the ventilation hygiene sector for just about 20 years now. I've cleaned ducts myself, I've inspected LEVs, I've done indoor air quality tests. I now run a business which is called Ventilation Surveys and Services. Also run a training centre through Hasman Limited, and have been involved with TR19 and some of the European ventilation hygiene publications as well. And I'm currently chairman of the ventilation group for BESA.
Yeah, thanks, George, and welcome. And that is an important link, I think. I'm glad you gave a plug for the two groups there, because you, as chair of ventilation group, are also an important member of our indoor air quality group. And the indoor air quality group is becoming a main specialist technical group within BESA later this year, showing that we're prioritising this area very much. So good to have you, George. Thank you. Training is going to be a big aspect of all of this, and we will be getting onto that later, because two of the training courses that BESA operates have been updated to reflect the new information within TR19 Air. So I'd like to, at this point, introduce Tony Beecher, Training Development Specialist at BESA. Tony, would you like to say hello to everybody and explain a little bit about your background?
That's great. Good afternoon, all. I, as you mentioned there, work for BESA, and it's been my pleasure and role really to try and bring together all the aspects of the panel really here today. So the specification has been set up, which is great, but then we need to make sure that people understand it and are able to actually deliver on the promise to actually do it properly and comply with things like the Building Safety Act, which obviously is a major driver really for a lot of the work that's going on from there. So I've built the two courses in partnership with employers in the first place to make sure it's from there, but also then to reflect what the TR19 Air is, but also to make sure it's deliverable with the likes of Hasman and some of the other training centres around the country. So
that's great. Thanks, Tony. Appreciate that. We'll be discussing training in a bit more depth later on. The next member of our panel is Ian Gregory. Ian is Managing Director of the Independent Air Quality Consultancy Services. Ian, welcome to the panel, and could you give us a little bit of a background of yourself as well, please?
Yeah, hi Ewan, and hi everybody on the webinar. My name's Ian. I'm predominantly for the last sort of 25 years been involved in ductwork cleaning, ventilation hygiene, and for the last 15 years we've been really sort of focusing on indoor air quality and sort of independent inspection and testing of ventilation systems. So I think we've got a good background in not only the ductwork cleaning part of TR19, but also the sort of the more raised interest in the indoor air quality part of our industry now, especially since COVID.
Thanks, Ian. Great. Welcome to the panel. Thank you. We'll be talking to you in a little bit later. So, and the final member of our panel is Mark Poultney. Mark is Managing Director at System Hygienics. Mark, welcome. Could you give us a little bit of background, please?
Hi, Ewan. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Mark Poultney, Managing Director of System Hygienics. We're a nationwide company in the ventilation hygiene space and maintenance, and co-author of this new TR19 Air.
Fantastic. So another great member of the panel. So you've met the panel. As you can see, we've got a lot of expertise there, and we should be able to cover all the bases, not putting any pressure on anybody, to explain to everybody on the webinar why this is important and everything you need to know about it. And I'll just say at this point, I think you can all see the public chat panel down the right-hand side of your screens. Please put your questions in there, and particularly if you think we're missing anything, just flag it up as we go along, please, and I will try and get to your questions and put them to the right person as we go. It's much better to have the questions as we go, I think. If you leave them all to the end, we tend to miss a few. So, you know, if something occurs to you, just pop it in there in the public chat and we'll pick it up. So on to our agenda. There we have agenda 5 items on the agenda for today, all the background to TR19 Air. I talked at the beginning about the wider context for this, particularly the healthcare implications. There's a tremendous amount of work gone into TR19 Air, but it's also, in a way, it's an evolution of something that has been going on for some decades now, as Gary mentioned earlier. So it seemed like a good way to kick off this discussion would be to go over to Gary and ask Gary, could you possibly give us a bit of the background, you know, the history, the wider context? Where did TR19 Air come from? I think it's important for people to know all the work and all the expertise that's grown up over the years, particularly within BESA, to make it possible to produce something like TR19 Air. Gary Nicholls.
Yeah, well, I think firstly, I think it's important to consider that a ventilation system's internal surface area is typically equivalent to 10% of the floor area it serves. Obviously, floors are typically cleaned, at least once a week, whereas ventilation systems, through which the air passes that we breathe, can often be left for decades without even being looked at, let alone cleaned. And that's been, that was a history. And we've got to ask ourselves, is that right? And obviously it's not. Now, I started my business, Swiftclean, in the early 80s, and we were cleaning heat transfer tubes. But one day we were asked to clean some supply ductwork at it was the British Airways cabin crew canteen at Heathrow Airport. And that was really when I discovered that ventilation ducts can become very, very dirty. Now, at that time, there was no legal obligation or any guidance on cleaning ventilation systems. They were basically cleaned, as a result of diligent maintenance engineers who sort of looked inside their ducts and thought, well, they look dirty, we ought to clean them. So that was what was done. Sensible people, cleaning what looked dirty. But as we all know, one person's view of dirty is another person's view of clean. So there was a bit of a problem there. Anyway, there was a small demand in the early 80s and through the 80s, and various companies were asked to do ductwork cleaning when these engineers considered their systems to be dirty and needed cleaning. And these various companies, just a handful of them, developed their own ways of actually going about cleaning ductwork, adapted methods, etc. With ourselves, we had rotary brushing equipment for small tubes, and we sort of innovated on that and developed it to be able to brush inside ductwork, and things have evolved a hell of a lot since then. It wasn't until 1992 when the workplace health, safety and welfare regulations were introduced to the European economy, and these placed for the first time a legal obligation on installers and operators of ventilation systems, basically to clean, as appropriate. That was the term, clean as appropriate, and those regulations applied to all existing ventilations also from 1996, and that was really the catalyst for growth in the ventilation hygiene market. But still, there was no industry guidance at that time. Now, there was a number of the practitioners in the ductwork cleaning industry were invited to an inaugural meeting at the HVCA at the time in 1996, when these ductwork practitioners we all got together and we collaborated, we shared our knowledge, and we wrote the first guide to good practice known as TR19. In fact, this is this document here, if anyone can see that. So there were 23 pages at the time of guidance, and that was published in 1998 eventually, and for the first time in the UK, a method and benchmark to establish surface contamination limits, at which point it would be considered appropriate to clean a ventilation system, was introduced, and therefore to help engineers to meet their legal obligations. and to, and also to have a consistent view of what was considered to be dirty, rather than different people's views being different, if you like. So there's a proper benchmark there. So the first, and also the first TR19 also provided a method of benchmarking for cleaning contractors as to prove that their post-cleaning works had met a minimum cleanliness requirement. So they met a minimum standard on the cleaning. Now, since the launch of TR17 back in 1998, we've seen the HVCA evolve and become what's now the BESA, the Building Engineering Services Association, and lots of further collaboration between the industry experts and other people coming into the industry, the young ones like George, and so we've all sort of shared knowledge and improved things. And what was TR17 it's gone through 6 updates to keep up to date with changes in the industry and cleaning methods, in all sorts of things around ventilation hygiene. We've now got to the stage where we have 2 separate specifications, in fact, available to support anyone who manages ventilation systems and also those responsible for cleaning them. And those 2 specifications are TR19 Grease, which was published in 2019, and that specifically focuses on kitchen extract system cleaning, and then TR19 Air, which was published this month. And so we've actually gone between those 2 documents from the 23 pages of advice in 1998 to 100 pages of advice between those 2 documents. Both specifications help those who are responsible for risk management and legal compliance in this area to help them comply. And TR19 Air specifically aims to ensure that the ventilation systems themselves do not contaminate the air that passes through them. And I think importantly, it provides advice on regular testing of ventilation systems, so that the ductwork transporting the air that we breathe can be identified as to when it needs cleaning. I think that's really summing up, what TR19 Air is all about.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I mean, the issue of access has always been a big one, hasn't it?
Always.
I think you and I have been discussing access to ductwork forever. The risk of maybe jumping slightly ahead, I think it might be interesting to mention that now, because obviously with the sheer scale of the guidance that's now available, we've obviously the amount of knowledge that's built up over those years, access still seems to be a problem.
Yeah, you're quite right, Ewan. And I think the problem being is that previous advice was that not all the access doors required for cleaning were not put in by the installers. So, I've been campaigning for a long while to, get it to the stage where the access doors are put in at the, construction stage, because that's the easiest time, the cheapest time to put access doors in. And most importantly, not to obstruct the access doors. That's the big problem we have as practitioners in our industry. You might put access doors might be put in there. They might be too small. The bigger the access door, the better, that's for sure. And not to obstruct them by services, gas pipes going across the access door, and also making sure that there is safe access to get to the access door is another really important consideration. It's no good having an access door where someone's got to, go on off of the edge of a ladder to try and get to it. We need safe working platforms. We're carrying out a health and safety task to make sure that the ducts are cleaned, but we don't want to be pushing our workers at risk because there's unsafe access to enable the maintenance to take place. So yeah, access is a big important consideration, both in making sure the access doors are in there and making sure that the operatives have safe means of getting to them to carry out their vital work.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I mean, that's obviously an ongoing battle for us, an ongoing campaign, and one that this is the next stage in it, I would say. So we're pushing for better access. One of our webinar attendees has mentioned the Building Safety Act already, because obviously this is a huge area around safety, and that might be a good opportunity, Ian, for you to talk a bit about driving forces behind TR19 and guidance generally around this area. I mean, I'm assuming Building Safety Act is going to be changing everything and is relevant to this area.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, certainly when the Building Safety Act came in, that kind of was a bit of a step change in the post-Grenfell Tower in our legislations in the UK. The Building Safety Act's going to be a big driver in our industry with regards to competence, which I think we'll probably touch on later with Tony in the training section. But it's key to ensure that the people carrying out the work in our industry are competent. And over the last sort of 25 years, I've seen a real step change in the companies carrying out this work and their competencies and the training that's available to them. And the knowledge that's around the industry now has changed massively. The big drivers, I suppose, are always going to be the health and safety legislations in this world, the workplace health, safety and welfare regulations. And also we've got some new British standards involved now with indoor air quality, which we've had to take into consideration when rewriting or republishing TR19. So BS 40102 has been introduced over the last few years, and that's really kind of driving the importance of indoor air quality and raising the sort of popularity of it as a subject for FM managers and the like. Obviously ventilation is a key sort of part of what BS 40102 is, but obviously we need to provide clean air. We spend 90% of our time inside, so it's quite key that air is of good quality, and ductwork is one of the sort of key reasons where indoor air quality can falter. We've obviously got the British standards as well for ductwork cleanliness, BSEN 15780 or European standards. So TR19 pretty much mirrors, or 15780 was TR19 was taken into its entirety, pretty much into it. So it's always mirrored the British standards, and part of this rewrite we've been just making sure that it's aligned to the British standards. The wordings are the same. The benchmarks have always been the same for cleanliness. So that's sort of the driving forces behind it, really. There's obviously lots of different legislations that run alongside those, but they're the key drivers. Yeah,
thanks, Ian. That's really helpful. That's yeah, there's a lot of new guys out there, and we've been particularly involved in the indoor air quality group with BS 4102, and we'll be getting more involved because that's part one's out, part two's coming out, so later in the year. Julian, our delegate who mentioned Building Safety Act, raises an interesting point, and this might be one, George, I noticed you're talking about a couple of things there in the chat as well. Julian's mentioned, I hadn't thought of it this way, large voids contributed to the fire at Grenfell, but he said, but you need larger ducts for better air quality. That's got a sort of classic sort of discuss after it. So I thought anybody like to pick that up? George, you like to?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a lot of validity to that point. It can come down to the design of the building as to how the air is delivered to that building. Buildings could have individual ventilation for each premises or domestic area, or they could have large centralized systems. So it does vary building from building, but the important thing is that the fire safety is designed into that building right from the very start. And the ventilation, as Julian highlights, is intrinsically linked to the fire safety of the building. So we have things such as fire dampers and fire rated ducts that where they pass through penetrations that are fire rated or part of the compartments, they can be controlled and kept in a safe order as per the design of the building. What we need to be careful of as the maintenance practitioners, if we're going in and doing retrospective work, that we make sure that we're aware of what the plan for that building was for its fire safety, so that the work we do doesn't compromise that along the way. And also keeping the ducts clean means that there's less route for ignition within those ducts as well, which is very, very relevant. So yeah, it's a valid point, but every building is designed in different ways. So we need to understand the design, the fire strategy, we need drawings, we need to sometimes go back to the consultants, and that's all linked to what came out of the Grenfell report with the golden thread for these buildings. We need the clients to give us the information when we go in and look around their buildings.
Yeah, and of course, TR19 Air and Greece are very helpful in this respect. The information's there, isn't it? You know, the questions to ask and the things to look for. And obviously, fire dampers has become a much bigger issue for all you guys, isn't it? I mean, there used to be, and there was a great statistic from years ago, which was something like people only knew about where 10% of the fire dampers actually were in buildings. So when it came to maintenance, it was a case of trying to find out if they had fire dampers at all and where they were and whether they'd ever been maintained. Is that, from you guys on the panel, is that getting better? People getting more aware of what they actually have in their buildings and what needs to be maintained? Anybody
Wants to jump in?
Anybody fancy that one?
Yeah. Certainly. I mean, I think the fire damper side of the business and the inspection and testing of fire dampers and the remedial side has certainly become one of the larger growing parts of the business. Building owners are certainly more aware of what they have in their buildings nowadays, post Grenfell Tower. There's been also some introduction of corporate manslaughter sort of legislations over the last few years, and that's really driven home the importance of inspecting some of these key safety critical parts of the equipment within the building. And obviously ductwork also, that dust within the ductwork, not only is it a health and safety risk with regards to sort of dirty air breathing in microbes and bacteria, that dust represents quite a significant thermal load on a building. In a large building, that dust could considerably, could spread the fire quite easily. It might only be a few microns deep, but that over quite a few thousand meters of ductwork is quite a considerable risk sometimes.
Thank you. No, thanks for that. That's a good point. And George, as you made that point in the chat about the Building Safety Act, is all about evidence, all about clarity, all about gathering information and keeping records. So that's a crucial part of what we're talking about. I mean, opportunity now to move on and introduce Mark Poultney. Mark, you were going to talk about a bit more specifically about the changes that are in TR19 Air.
Yeah, some of the changes, Ewan, thank you. I mean, the changes basically are here to reiterate and reinforce the renewed importance of indoor air quality, and try and bring manufacturers, installers, and hygiene maintenance firms more together with maintaining ventilation systems and getting them fit for purpose. One of the things in section 2 that's reiterated again is the responsibility to install access for ductwork on install, and to also check the cleanliness when handed over new ductwork systems. It's recognised that during construction, the ductwork system is probably in the most damaging environment that it actually is in its lifetime. And so renewed importance on checking the levels of dust, etc., in the ductwork, and potentially then cleaning all the ductwork before it's handed over is reiterated in that space. What is also mentioned, I believe that wasn't mentioned there before, is that there's no retention for the cleaning firms, as it's a one-off clean to the ductwork. But it does mention also that then ongoing maintenance of the ductwork, as for the approved code of practice and the workplace health and safety regulations, should be in place as well. So a couple of things there that we've mentioned already in access, and also in cleanliness when we actually hand the systems over.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, an interesting, just a point picked up in the panel. Thanks everybody for sending their points in and questions in. Is this interesting business about getting the balance right between, you know, statutory minimum levels and comfort? Now that's interesting. So I mean, we're having to, obviously, you think you prioritize safety, but you can't do that. You can't exclude comfort, because comfort's got to be part of the equation, isn't it? I think James is saying trouble is the available space in most buildings and costs make this appear impossible. I think he's saying impossible to get that balance right. Is that correct? Is that something anybody would like to comment on?
I would just say there's a lot of truth in those statements, but if you take it back to what TR19 is about, and what we're talking about here is TR19 is about ensuring that you inspect and you maintain the ventilation that is fitted or installed to the correct ways, and making sure that they're delivering air as they were designed by cleaning them and maintaining them. So we can't necessarily control the buildings that are out there that don't have ventilation. That's not what TR19 is really about. TR19 is more about how do we ensure that those buildings that do have ventilation in them, that they're inspected correctly, because a big part of TR19 air and grease is about inspections. And then when there is a requirement to clean, that they are cleaned and maintained at that point. But TR19 is not a fix for those buildings that don't have ventilation in them. That's a much bigger problem, and more of a thing we're probably talking more about with the IAQ group, I would say, Ewan.
Trying to get ventilation into buildings in the first place. Yeah, absolutely.
And
so an earlier point that was made by Nathan was, therefore, so if you do find a problem under TR19, how do you enforce action?
Who wants to go on there? Enforcing action. People always want something as a lever. So they want what you do have now in the Building Safety Act is the HSE are much more closely involved. So that will at some point start to come down the line. But enforcing is, I don't think, the correct way to look at this. It's about educating people about the requirements. This is there is a requirement to do this. There is law. People need to understand that there is long-standing law. Gary spoke about that. There has been law since 1992. My maths, that's 32 years ago. That law came into place. So from that point onwards, there's been requirements on people to clean and maintain. And then we've had subsequent things like EN 15780 that set out the inspection frequencies. We've brought that into TR19. There is all of this stuff out there. We need to make sure people are aware of it, and then we need to encourage them to do it, to comply. But also, the benefits of that are, why would you install a very, very expensive ventilation system to a large building and then not ensure that it works correctly? Because these systems will cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to install and design, but they cost thousands of pounds potentially to inspect and maintain. So it's a small cost against a very large asset that has multiple benefits for health and performance of the occupants that are in those buildings and those spaces. So we need to make sure that we encourage people to be aware of the law that is there already, and to then use the guides and the specifications that are out there to meet those requirements.
It's that old out of sight, out of mind thing, isn't it? I mean, they've got the system, might not be aware they've got the system, or they put the system in and thought that solved their problem. They didn't think about maintenance. So I mean,
Yeah.
that applies to a lot of things in our industry, doesn't it?
Buildings and those spaces. So we need to make sure that we encourage people to be aware of the law that is there already and to then use the guides and the specifications that are out there to meet those requirements.
It's that old out of sight, out of mind thing, isn't it? I mean, they've got the system, might not be aware they've got the system, or they put the system in and thought that solved their problem. They didn't think about maintenance. So, I mean, that applies to a lot of things in our industry, doesn't it?
Ewan.
Yes.
Sorry, I was going to say,
Sorry.
I suppose really as a bit of an outsider from the group here, not being necessarily just ventilation, this is where particularly BESA come in to actually play, because we are able to lobby what's going on. You know, the BSE industry has always been a victim of its own success. The better job we do, the more everybody ignores it.
Yeah.
And systems that are actually put in, etc. from there. So it can be quite often hidden. But as part of what we're trying to do is obviously make sure, raise awareness really for building managers, building owners, that the Building Safety Act is starting to say, show us, demonstrate how you've made sure the right compliant people are in there and that are actually working in your building. That then drives on to insurers to actually make sure that that's happened. So if you like the stick at the end, but also the designers in the first place to make sure there are suitable setups with access doors and things like that in the first place. So it's not localized, as George said there, just to TR19 Air. It's across the whole of the industry now to be responsible and to look at the buildings from start to end, as well as the maintenance on the way through. And if the people that are managing the buildings don't even know the systems are there, why would they ask for them to be cleaned? You know, they just to make assumptions that things work properly. So we're trying to raise that with obviously the specification, but also then the training, etc. on the back end of that. Sorry, specification, but also then the training, etc. on the back end of that. Sorry to interrupt, but it was just to build on a number of points spoken
No,
about.
it's a really good point, Tony. Thank you for that. And I was going to say this is an opportunity maybe for you to talk then more widely about competence and compliance and you know, the big bit of work that's going on within BESA now, which is linked to the Building Safety Act, but other aspects such as this around competence and compliance.
Yep, that would be great. So in simplistic terms with what we have now, we're obviously going to we've launched in with the training centres such as George's, with Hasman and a couple of the others. We've separated now the training. We've looked at it and said, okay, TR19 specification is brilliant, but if nobody understands what it is or how it applies, what's the point? So we've now looked at it and said, operatives, it's about cleaning. There are some very clear guidelines within the TR19 Air that say how you go about cleaning something, the methodologies and things to do that, which is great. But then we started to say, okay, technicians, you need to set up risk assessments to make sure it's being done safely, but also method statements to how actually things are coming together and what's actually happening from there. With the best will in the world, we're hopeful that the right number of access panels will be put in, but we want to make sure that they are put in correctly as well. So that falls again into the technicians' roles. But I think Gary was one of the people that mentioned as well, we need to also focus a lot more on testing it to make sure in the first place what it looks like in the first place, cleanliness wise, but also on a regular basis to continue to make sure it continues to be clean. I think there was assumptions that the air outside was clean. It isn't always. So feeding air directly in from outside can actually introduce contaminants within a system. And the bigger picture that you mentioned there, Ewan, is we are very, very focused on the Building Safety Act, enlightening people as to what that means and showing their ability to actually demonstrate what compliance looks like, not only with their people and the actual way they actually work in buildings, but also their legislative and legal requirements to show that they, as a business, are compliant and are able to step up and say, you know, unfortunately, we've all probably listened to the Grenfell ones where people went, we didn't know it was our fault. We didn't know that was us. We didn't know we were legally required to do that. So we're now trying to build a system whereby we can say, okay, you can put all your statements of this is what my compliance is and share that with your contractors, share that with your clients, make that available to all so it's obvious and upfront. That will then raise the bar, little by little maybe, and obviously then vent hygiene will become a little bit more higher profile. People will understand that people that are doing it through BESA, you know, using all this great knowledge and experience and skills that have been set up with the TR19 is actually being put into place. and is actually happening, not just once when it arrives, but for the ongoing 3, 4, 5 years as we're going forward, really. So just building not just vent hygiene, but across the whole of BSE, etc. from there, and making sure that everybody can see what competence and compliance looks like. Who's doing it well, who isn't? If not, why not? Can we support them? I think George mentioned there to support people to actually go change the way you do things, make it better by using these specifications, make it better by using these training courses to raise your game and improve what you're supplying to your customers.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I mean, it's really interesting because I think one of the messages coming out of all the work going on around the Building Safety Act is that industry is being challenged to define what good looks like. And I think, in a way, I think maybe people didn't quite get that point. They were assuming that the building safety regulator was going to tell everybody what to do. And they're actually saying, no, you need to decide what good looks like, and therefore, and then train to be competent in line with that. So I think I'm right in assuming, Tony, that this work, TR19 Air, is going to go a long way towards defining competence in this particular part of the industry.
Absolutely. Up till now, we've been a little bit wishy-washy, maybe about saying, yes, there's some good specifications, but how we demonstrated it. And obviously, if we're not broadcasting that to the wider the communities, you know, the likes of Hasman have been doing a great job in training small numbers of people, but not necessarily across the whole industry. Whereas now the Building Safety Act is driving the other end. It's saying to the actual building owners, okay, you know, you've said you've had your system cleaned. By whom? To what standard? To what specification? Were they compliant? Were they competent to do so? And obviously now those things are actually being brought into play with that one now. So, you know, insurance companies, I'm sure, are going to follow very quickly on the back end and say, okay, your building failed. There has been lots of illnesses, etc. for your building. Why? Show us. Where did you comply? Who did you use? And these sort of things are actually coming along very quickly now.
All comes back to that evidence. So George, Tony mentioned you're doing a great job at training a small number of people. Sounded like a backhanded compliment to me. But how do we get it?
Not meant in that way at all. They've been striving, you know, in small numbers, unfortunately, and we'd like everybody to do it.
That was my question. So, George, how do we make it? You're doing a great job training a large number of people.
Well, I think if you look at what's been done on the grease side of the industry, those numbers are a lot higher than they are currently on the air side. So we've had training provision for the kitchen side of the marketplace for a bit longer, and it's been more established, and those numbers are in the hundreds, you know, probably approaching now, getting towards 1,000 people that have gone through those courses, but it is much lower for the air side. But what happened, the driver needs to come from what we tell people. It's a bit like that enforcement thing. We're now very clearly telling people in TR19 Air what sort of qualifications people should have. And there's a couple of different pathways detailed in TR19 Air for what people can do for their staff, for their employees. And that's beneficial for clients and end users as well, because they can look at that document and go, what should I be asking as a qualification for those people coming into my building? And that's there now. That's in the document. It's quite clear for everyone. So the BESA courses are one way that can be achieved. We have a training centre with some useful stuff in there, because not everybody in the businesses they work in might have mechanised methods of cleaning in their business. Gary mentioned that they pioneered those sort of things many years ago, and they've developed now. So we have robots, for example, that can be driven around. Not everybody will have seen that or touched that. So if they come to a centre that has those sort of facilities, they can see and use those things and learn about those things in an environment which is going to be beneficial to them. And other people can come along and demonstrate that they already know how to use those things. And at the end of that process, what we do is we look at them and we give them some test environments, and they demonstrate their knowledge and their skills. And that's a great thing. Other routes go and look at them in the workplace and assess them doing the job. So we're now, as an industry, got pathways for people to show what skills they have, what knowledge they have. That's a great leap forward, and it's beneficial to the contracting companies, because we're now starting to build a pool of people who can move with qualification and skills. So if you take someone who has that qualification, you know they meet a certain standard and they would be beneficial to your business. And likewise, customers know that someone coming into their property should know what they're doing as well if they've got those requirements. So the numbers will grow now because TR19 Air tells you what you should have. It also tells you the way you should record all the information and put it together as well. So we meet some of those golden thread elements now with all of that. We've had post-clean reporting, which has been very well known for kitchen extracts for a long time. People need to understand there are requirements for reporting in TR19 as well. Testing frequencies in time, testing frequencies by volume and length of duct. That's something new in the document, which is very beneficial. So there's a lot of good stuff there to help people demonstrate and understand what's required, and then show that they have the skills and the knowledge, and they've got the qualifications to go out and do those works.
Yeah, thank you.
What was also
George.
trying to allude to, Ewan, was the fact that, you know, we're also getting other centres around the country now. We're getting a bit of geographical spread. Swiftclean are actually stepping up to actually come from that. And obviously, when training becomes more and more available, then we're more likely to be able to get more and more people through and raising the benchmark across the whole country as well. Not just within England, but Scotland and Wales and Ireland as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just draw people's attention to the fact Jane from the Academy put a link in the chat there. So if anybody wants to find out more about the BESA courses, it's in there. There's a lot of stuff coming into the chat panel, but Jane posted a link there, and Louise has posted a link to Hasman, their hygiene technician courses. So if you want to follow those up, they're there.
Other courses are available.
Other courses are available. I was about to say that. Yeah, a message from our sponsor there.
Well, and we will point them towards the different centres as they come available, because we do want to raise that benchmark. And as you mentioned with the fire and smoke dampers, that's one of our next priorities to actually move on to that. And again, we'll need training centres to be able to deliver and support that as well with the specification coming live.
And I should say as well, our friend Helen at BESA, she always says that competence is not just a qualification. She always makes that point. So, you know, it's more than just going on a course or ticking a box. You know, there are changes to the industry that come around, and this is a change. So people need to be aware of that. That's why this webinar would be great for people to show their staff, because it makes them aware of some of the changes that have come about, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, that's Helen often talks about this more. There's a lot of it's about behaviours as well. So it's not just about technical skills. It's about doing the right thing, isn't it? In many cases, and that's really coming out of the Grenfell inquiry too. There's been a few comments around commissioning in the chat. Mark, is that you, Mark?
It is me, yes.
I said, who's this Mark person? Oh yeah, he's on the panel. Mark, what was your point there about disconnect with commissioning agents?
Yeah, I think John made a point there on handover. There's a bit of a disconnect with commissioning agents, and it's certainly true that not a lot of the large commissioning agents understand totally what should be handed over in ventilation. And especially with all ventilation related things as well, like fire dampers, etc. So I do feel that it is a good point of education, because it would help us eliminate what Gary was talking about before, the access issues with access doors for ventilation cleaning, access doors for fire damper testing, and other trades coming in afterwards and putting services in the way, so none of that maintenance can be done. I think if we took that commissioning part of the building over a little bit more, we wouldn't get so many buildings later on that would be so difficult to maintain.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and going further back, there's comments here about design, obviously, back to our point about access. I think Gary mentioned DW144. George, you mentioned there's been an addendum added to DW144. What does that cover?
I believe so. So table 3 is where there's quite a big change. It's only a small change, but it's a big change. So around fire dampers. So previously, it was a well-intentioned idea that the installer would install one access panel, and then the maintenance contractor would come along and install the other access panel at the fire damper at a later point or at commissioning. However, that's got very confused over the years, and for simplicity and clarity on that, the requirement now is with the installer to fit those access panels at the point of installation of the system. That's a very important change. So that has been reflected in DW 144 by way of an addendum, but it's now in TR19 Air, and people need to understand that key change, because you could still have a lot of buildings trying to be handed over with only one access panel in place, which, as Gary said earlier, can lead to a lot more cost to the occupants or the owners if you don't put them in at the point of installation and before the full fit out is done. It becomes a lot more complex when the building's occupied and furnished.
If I can add, could I add something there?
Yeah.
In terms of the CDM regs, there is a requirement for designers to design systems that are maintainable. And we shouldn't forget, the designers are the ones who are writing these specifications, doing the design drawings. It's really important that the designers do factor in all these access doors, so that us as maintainers of the cleanliness can actually carry out work effectively, right from the start, rather than having to go through a lot of effort to put in these extra access doors that would have been fairly simple to put in the first place, and then someone to police the project
Under CDM.
under the CDM, so that these access doors are not obstructed during the install.
Because historically, wasn't the situation that you would come along to do the first clean of an installed system, find you couldn't access it, you would then say to the client, we need to put access panels in. That's how it used to work.
That's correct, yeah.
And the client would say, well, I can't afford for you to put access panels in. So therefore, you'd have to report that the system couldn't be cleaned or couldn't be cleaned fully.
Exactly. Yeah, and plus you're cutting into any insulation as well. So you've got all that problem. So you're then releasing man-made mineral fibres into the environment. When you try to cut these access doors in. So there's so many good reasons for putting the access door in from day one, so that they can insulate up against the access door much more effectively, by experts, who know how to seal insulation properly. There's so many cases for putting those in, right from the word go, and I think it's critical.
I'll tell you as well, we've also got leakage testing as well, and all of these other things now. So the systems should really be in their state that they're going to stay in for the lifetime of that building at the point when it's handed over, which is why the installers should really be putting those panels in. And don't forget, these panels are not just there for cleaning and maintenance, they're there for inspection. The first point of TR19 is inspection all the time. People forget it's about inspection. The inspection drives the cleaning. If it's not dirty and it's in a good state, you don't need to clean it. So inspection is what TR19, that's the start of the journey of TR19, and cleaning is further down that pathway.
Because in effect, you wouldn't know it needed cleaning, would you? If you couldn't see, you wouldn't be able to see, would you? So.
Exactly. Yeah. I think also the other thing is making sure you've got evidence of that inspection. That's what TR19 Air gives you. It gives you a format for photographing your inspections, for taking tests. So that you've got historical evidence of your periodic inspections. I think one thing we didn't note was that there are 3 cleanliness quality classes to consider, depending on the type of area that the system is serving. So you would have less frequent inspections for a low quality class system, which might be, I don't know, serving storerooms or something. But then you've got a ventilation system serving an operating theatre or a laboratory. You might want to be, you'd probably class that as a high quality class, and therefore more frequent inspections. But the overall important thing is that there's a historical log of what's been done to maintain cleanliness by checking whether it's dirty or not. over a long period of time. There's something that it's probably worth mentioning. Very much related to the Grenfell fire, because my company actually cleaned the extraction systems of the Grenfell tower, and we installed some devices into those ducts as well. And after the fire, I was personally interviewed by the Metropolitan Police. As a result, all the contractors who were involved in that project to upgrading the tower before the fire, they were all interviewed, and I was interviewed, by two officers by video, my office here, and I was able to give full evidence that I had photographs before and after of every grill that had been taken out and cleaned and put back in, so my conscience was very clear, and I was able to evidence that as well. That, when it comes to an event like that, you realise how important documentary evidence of your the work you've carried out is absolutely critical.
Yeah, good point. And that is making this work even more important now, isn't it? This drive for evidence and being able to the golden thread. I think George mentioned the golden thread earlier, having that stream of information. There's been a lot of comments in the panel about access doors, and architects are coming up because architects don't like seeing access panels. Raj has asked, is it possible for people to go for site operatives to have a course about how to put in access panels? Is there a training course for access panels alone? Because again, I guess if they were suddenly made aware that there was an issue, they could just pop them in, he says, naively.
Well, the second part is really the technicians now. We've put the onus on the technicians to actually install the access panels as part of the AHT course. But of course, I'm sure training providers, if you specifically said, well, we've got all the aspects of everything else, we're all up to date, you could potentially just do the access panels. But it's in your interest really to consider the bigger picture, to consider all the aspects that we've talked about today, because the golden thread all the way through is now being held to show your compliance, within that Building Safety Act. So cherry picking a small part and saying, I just want to know about the access panels would then leave you vulnerable if somebody said, well, okay, you did that bit, but you haven't done this bit. So you'd end up finding yourself not able to actually demonstrate compliance with both. So in theory, yes, but you're probably better off doing both or doing the whole thing and making sure you've actually covered it all.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, if I could just come in there and maybe speak for some of the manufacturers stroke installers that may well be on here, it is very, very difficult on a construction site to time everything correctly on a first fix for ductwork going in and then cable trays going in afterwards, etc. They're different firms, different people. But look, the document here and can only reflect the law, can only tell what the truth is. It's up to the industry to get together and actually work it out, that it actually is handed over as a workable building with a ventilation system that is able to be maintained. And I believe that the training requirements from the Hackett report as well are throughout any industry. So, the installers will have to learn how to do access doors, as well as the maintenance firms who are putting things right later on. So it is something that is not done at the moment, that is difficult to do, but it doesn't mean to say that it should not be done, because it definitely should.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thanks for that, Mark. And thanks to you all. We are into our last minute. I guess the public, I don't know how this works, but the public chat might remain available, because I notice, George, particularly you've answered some of the points that were raised in there. We couldn't cover everything, although some of them were more like comments. But thanks, thank you for sort of replying to some of those in the chat. And I'm glad we were able to cover quite a few of your questions in the discussion. That's it. Now it's 1 o'clock. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I think we've probably sort of scratched the surface. pardon the pun. But I'd like to thank all the panel for your expert input. I think that was really illuminating. TR19 is a big piece of work, so I'd like to congratulate all you guys who are involved in that. I think it's a really important development, and it's a big priority for BESA this year. And I'm very pleased to be supporting that through the Indoor Air Quality Group as well. So thank you to the panel. Thank you to all of our delegates for attending. I hope you found that useful. The last slide is up there. That shows you where to go to download the document. So please do that. Tony mentioned the BESA Academy training courses. So there's more information in the panel about that, and where you can find out more about training. So
and you get a free copy of the TR19 as part of your training. So
that's right. I put that in the press release, Tony, as well. Yeah, that's very good. So if you do the training course, you get a free copy. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all. Thanks for all your hard work, and thank you to everybody who attended. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.